Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name's Walt Andrews. I'm a research assistant with the San Juan County Ag Extension. And today we are very honored to have with us our speakers, Dr. Shakara Tyler and Dr. Robert Zabawa, who will share with us today. Dr. Lindsey Lunsford will continue to facilitate the sessions. I want to take just a moment to say thanks to our sponsors and our partners. We really appreciate their help. And then we will go forward. I want to give a few Zoom tips very briefly. We ask that everyone keep yourself muted. This session is going to be recorded, just so you know that. It's going to be made available later. Unless the facilitator or speaker invites questions, please hold on to your questions until the end of the presentation. If you'd like, you can please rename yourself. You could, go up to where your, let's see, where your name is listed, and you can rename yourself as with your name and your location if you would prefer. We would love to see your face, so please feel free to turn on your video. However, we understand if your internet's a little slow or, for one reason or another, you want to leave that off, and that's fine. And then finally, just the last thing is that if you're utilizing the chat, then just please be aware that's a public chat. And then the last thing I'm going to go over before I hand this on to Lindsey will be, to Dr. Lunsford, will be our community commitment. So let's just take a moment here and look. We've gone over these before, but want to take just a moment to go through them. We will actively listen and honor the experiences that others have lived. That's the first one. And then we will create a space that allows for learning and growth. This can be difficult at times, challenging at times. Move up, move up. If you're someone who speaks easily, then please move up into a listening role. And if you're someone who listens a little more easily, then move up into a speaking role. Next, we will be mindful of the intent versus the impact of our statements. And this means speaking in I statements. So just kind of be aware that, sometimes some of the things we share or say might have a little different impact on someone with a different lived experience. And then lastly, we want to have grace with each other and just, be humble about our mistakes and use them as learning opportunities and go forward that way. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Lunsford. She is a Sustainable Food Systems Resource Specialist with the Tuskegee University Cooperative Extension and is at the Carver Integrative Sustainability Center. I will pass on the session to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walt. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces from last week. Hi, Kathy. I remember seeing you and a few others. I won't shout you all out. You might just want to be here incognito, which is totally fine. So happy to be back. And last week was such a great, impactful session. We got to learn a lot with Dr. Tyler and really happy to have her back this week again to share some wisdom with us. So if you missed last week's session, no worries. You'll be able to get some information and still get a chance to hear from Dr. Tyler today. And also we have a special treat as well. We're also two presenters this week's series. So we're also joined by Dr. Robert Zabawa. Dr. Robert Zabawa is someone I personally look up to and have great admiration for. And I'm honored to say I'm a past mentee of here at Tuskegee University. So glad to have him here. But I also want to go ahead and just for the sake of those that are new to the space and for anyone that may not be familiar, I would like to share with you all the bios and the background for our speakers. So for those that this is a bit of a reintroduction, we welcome you. And for those that this is new information, we welcome you as well. So Dr. Shakara Tyler is a returning generation farmer, educator, and activist scholar. who engages in Black agrarianism, agroecology, food sovereignty, and climate justice as commitments of abolition and decolonization. She obtained her PhD at Michigan State University in community sustainability and works with Black farming communities in Michigan and the Mid-Atlantic. She also serves as board president at the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. She is a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op and a member of the Black Dirt Farm Collective, which is an awesome organization. I'd encourage you all to look more into it. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Robert Zabawa to you all. Like I said, Dr. Zabawa is a past mentor, or I wouldn't call it past. I still learn a lot from Dr. Zabawa, but Dr. Zabawa is a anthropology. He graduated in anthropology from the College of William and Mary with his master's and his PhD in anthropology from Northwestern University. He's worked at Tuskegee University for over 35 years. His domestic research, which includes small scale and minority farming systems with an emphasis on land ownership, air property, family networks, resettlement, and policy as it pertains to access and equity issues for African American and other socially disadvantaged groups here in the US. His international research, because Dr. Zabawa is global, focuses on agricultural development, production, decision-making, value chain analysis, and marketing strategies. He has worked in Belize, Senegal, Tanzania, and for the past 20 years, he's been on a team promoting the adaptation of the orange sweet potato in Ghana. He currently coordinates the Agricultural and Resource Economics Master's Program and co-directs the Integrative Public Policy and Development PhD program, which I am honored to say I'm a proud graduate of that program. So those are our speakers for today. I hope you're excited. Flash your hands if you're excited and you're ready for, not if you're happy and you know it, we're way too adult for that, but flash your hands if you are excited for this slate of speakers. Awesome, I see some splashes, I see some flashes. So before we do that, I'm going to read for you all and I invite you to share in this understanding of our land acknowledgement. And I thank the team for crafting this document, for us to share and just to have this moment of reflection to give thanks for those that have gone before us and labored before us, for us to be able to reap the benefits of what we're able to receive today. So, and then with no further ado, we'll get into these presentations. So we recognize and honor all peoples who have ancestral ties to these lands and waters. We also recognize and honor both our ancestors and all those living who have contributed their labor, experience, and knowledge to growing food and nourishing communities. We recognize the importance of uplifting the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in spaces where they've been excluded or made invisible. We welcome and honor the speakers from these communities who will be sharing knowledge, experience, and wisdom with us as part of this event. As we honor these people and ancestors, acknowledge historic and current injustices, and work to find ways to move from acknowledgement to practice, it is our hope this event can offer a next step in building relationships that will in turn aid in building a more equitable food system. So with that, with no further ado, I will hand this over to Dr. Tyler, who I believe is our first speaker. And then we will get into, after Dr. Tyler presents, we will have a presentation from Dr. Zabawa, and then we'll have some time for question and answer and group dialogue. So get your notepads ready if you have any questions, and I will hand this over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lunsford. Peace, everyone. Is my audio okay? Just need to double check again. Okay, wonderful. It's good to see everyone back. For those that are returning and the new faces that are joining us. I'm going to be, let me share my screen first. All right. So I'm going to be sharing today about the African influences on US or American agriculture. And everything I'm sharing in this presentation is understood to be factual narrative within the framing of Black regenerative farming and land stewardship methods developed by Black people throughout the diaspora, which are often ignored and in favor of other perspectives. Thus, this is meant to be an unveiling and reclaiming of histories that have been forgotten, stolen, ignored, and revised. And when I say African, I mean African influences in terms of the African diasporic processes, which explicitly includes African American people, principles, and histories, etc. And I want to make a quick note about the backdrop image here, Sankofa. It's an Adinkra symbol that comes from the Ghanaian African symbology system that means to go back and fetch it. And so again, this represents a huge part of our reclamation, not just as Black agrarian scholars and researchers, or Black agrarian person in general for me, but also for all of our communities here on Turtle Island. So this is a fairly comprehensive list of Afro-Indigenous crops and practices that was generated by the Soul Fire Farm staff in upstate New York. Shout out to Leah Penniman and her team. Based on the list, American agriculture and food culture would not be what it is without the contributions of Africa, the entire continent of Africa, and the people that migrated from Africa across the globe prior, during, and after the violent conspiracy of the Middle Passage. And I will go into further details about certain crops and practices throughout the presentation. So I'll highlight my favorite crops and practices: okra, cotton, sesame, black-eyed pea, eggplant, melons, any kind of melon, especially watermelon, black rice, East African kale, sorrel, coffee, of course, the kola nut, vermicomposting, Sweden agriculture, irrigation. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in regards to these crops and practices that are thought to have originated specifically on the continent of Africa. And African agricultural technology has ancient roots in Nile Valley civilizations, and ancient Egyptians are credited with establishing the world's first irrigation systems over 5,000 years ago. So this was necessary because although the Nile River provided moisture for natural irrigation, there were extended dry periods throughout the spring and summer that followed annual flooding. So the ancient Egyptians also were the first to use hydraulic engineering to achieve what we know as basin irrigation. And that's this center photo here. It's sort of a modern day example. And within the system, dry areas were watered by a system of canals. Sorry, I meant the far photo on the right, my right. Sorry, let me go back. Within this system, dry areas were watered by a system of canals that could also carry surplus water back to the Nile River when it was not needed. Egyptian farmers cultivated nearly 2 million acres for millennia within the system. And Egyptian irrigation techniques were so effective that they were implemented by cultures of Greece and Rome and others. And the ancient Egyptians also invented the shadaf, which is the center photo here, still in use today in Africa and other places, which uses a counterbalance to lift water. So these are just a few examples of how watering our plants, our crops, come from ancient Egyptian agricultural systems that date back thousands and thousands of years. And of course, other people have other examples. If you have any other examples, feel free to share in the chat and we can discuss them later. The axe, hoe, and plow are also believed to be ancient Egyptian inventions. Hoes specifically began to be used between 5,000 and 8,000 years ago in Egypt, predating the first pharaoh. The African style hoe can be discerned in being larger and heavier, making it more suitable for primary tillage compared to the European hoe being much lighter and designed primarily for cultivation. And so this far right photo is an example a sort of modern day painting of what ancient Egyptian agriculture would look like using these tools. Excuse me. And then the far left photo, or the far left photo is an example of what the tool, specifically the plow, would have looked like the way back then, thousands of years ago. So this is a table by Dr. Owusu Bendeli, who I mentioned last week in the presentation. There's going to be some repeat slides for those that attended last week. And he shared about the various examples of tropical multiple cropping sequences that originated in Africa as a way to highlight the soil fertilization methods and also cultivating biodiversity within the agricultural system. So an example would be using yam and pairing that with millet, sorghum, cowpeas, or black-eyed peas, as some people know, as an intercropping system, as a way to deter pests, as a way to increase soil fertilization, etc. And so there are various other examples here that are still used today, particularly within Black agricultural networks, to build up the soil, particularly in the South, where a lot of these crops will grow more effectively and efficiently compared to up north. I've tried to grow several of these crops in the Midwest up north, and our hot season isn't long enough. So, but I'm going to keep trying. So I encourage everyone to peruse this table and try out some different intercropping sequences if you haven't already. And I can also share the source of this at the end of the presentation if folks are interested. So Three Mo Sisters is an example of an African indigenous cropping system, similar to the Turtle Island indigenous Three Sisters that many of us are familiar with, corn, squash, and beans. So within the Three Mo Sisters, and Mo is very intentional with Black vernacular, not more, but Mo. Within our culture, we consider this intercropping sequence to be to have this very special cultural significance to us as a Black agrarian culture and network, and also as a way to honor the lands that we farm on and our connection to our indigenous heritage in Africa. So sweet potato and our watermelon, cowpea, and sorghum are the three crops that make up the system. And black-eyed peas, sort of similar to the way the beans and the more well-known Three Sisters system provides the biological nitrogen fixation in the soil. The watermelon vines provide soil shade, similar to the way the squash does. And then the sorghum stalks, similar to the way the corn does, provides the climbing mechanism for the beans. So sorghum stalks, as drought and heat tolerant crop, can be used to make molasses, broomsticks, building material, grains. It could be used for animal feed. It can be popped like popcorn. It can be boiled like rice, ground into flour, and fermented into beer. And so sorghum, similar to maize or corn, is very, very multifaceted. And so this three Mo Sisters system is an example of us influencing American agriculture as well. African rice is, I think some people may be familiar with the African rice story. Enslaved Africans brought a wealth of knowledge based on our mastery of agricultural technology, production practices, and culinary skills, as well as medicinal and other uses for the plants. And before being forced onto the enslavement ships in the journey to the Americas, the story goes that we braided rice into our hair as a way to carry our cultural heritage with us and ensure we had a food supply when arriving to the Americas. And this braiding the plants into our hair, or the seeds into our hair, is depicted in Soul Fire Farms painting here, which is a really beautiful depiction of what this would have looked like, right? So some say that the most profound influence of African agricultural technology in the Western Hemisphere is found in the production and cooking of rice. And one variety of rice, the Orzra glaberrima, sometimes called wet rice, is believed to have been domesticated about 3,500 years ago along the Niger River. In fact, enslavers purposefully scoped out Africans from rice growing regions in Africa who were bound for South Carolina because of their extensive experience in rice production. So the enslaved Africans usually had more knowledge and experience in growing rice than did the white plantation owners who sought them. And the Asian rice, Orzra sativus, became the rice of choice to be grown in the Western Hemisphere rather than the Orzra glaberrima. And there were Africans who had experience with both varieties. So rather than Europeans introducing rice to the Americas from West Africa, which was previously considered to be fact, and then Judith Carney, who wrote the book Black Rice, proved that theory irrelevant or wrong. Africans transferred the seed and the cultivation skills and the cultural practices necessary for establishing rice in the Americas. And I think some of you may be familiar with the popular brand Carolina rice, which began to be cultivated in South Carolina per the name in the 17th century through the expertise of enslaved Africans. And the rice plantation economy grew to be a dominant commodity through the Civil War and beyond. Sesame is thought to be the oldest oilseed crop originating in sub-Saharan Africa. Egyptians called it sesmet and considered it to be plant medicine. Enslaved Africans brought it to South Carolina during the early 18th century, and it was eaten raw, toasted, or boiled in soups and by enslaved Africans. Today, it's used mainly as a topping for breads and in the form of tahini. Cotton is an especially sacred crop to the Igbo people located mainly in southeastern Nigeria. Women took them as contraceptives, and they were also used in traditional rituals as well. And due to the importance of cotton as a dominant commodity in the building of the US empire, it has become stigmatized and negatively associated with Black exploitation. Again, we were the experts on cultivation and had the ancestral connections to the plant that dictated our intimate relationship with it. So there's a reason that cotton is so heavily linked to Black agrarian culture, not just through enslavement, but through the Afro-Indigenous history of the plant as well. So there are several plants that are used for everyday beverages that many of us enjoy. Rooibos, which is here on the far right, was first processed and utilized by the Caucasian people of South Africa. So the plant, the picture on the bottom depicts it before it's harvested, and then the picture on the top depicts it as a dried herb that can be then steeped in water for tea or used for another purpose. So this leguminous plant produces rooibos tea, which is my favorite way to drink it, also known as red bush tea or South African red tea. And coffee, which is the center photo, originated in the highlands of Ethiopia and was first used by the indigenous peoples there. Hibiscus is probably is considered a native of West Africa. It was reportedly preferred as a drink by some pharaohs in ancient Egypt, which is the picture on the far left. And all three of these beverages are now marketed widely throughout the Western world. And we can again give thanks to the continent of Africa for birthing these plants for us. So I want to quickly take a brief moment and have an interactive component so I don't feel like I'm just going on and on and on. I'm curious to know, and you can type in the chat if you would like, what are valid sources of historical information from your perspective? They could be books, it can be films, it could be oral histories, something else completely that I haven't mentioned but what would you consider to be valid sources of historical information? Because a lot of the knowledge that I'm sharing has been captured through several historical retrieval of information sources. And it's important that we, understand what is valid and what is not, or what is preferred and what is not. So entertain my curiosity for a minute. I would appreciate that. And if not, we could also wait until the Q&A to discuss as well. Thank you, Dr. Luns, for autoethnography. Yes, that is my favorite. Actually, I did an autoethnography as part of my dissertation for that reason. Yeah, we're here. That's really dope. Oh yeah, I would love to read it. I have to look it up. Okay, Black storytellers, like the griots, right? The African indigenous storytellers. Okay, Sam usually goes with books, lots of references. Oral history should be held in higher esteem. I agree. Yep. Actually, a lot of the information that I've held very close to my heart, learning about Black agrarian culture and just myself as a person, as a spiritual being, has been through oral histories. Touring the South, listening to elders and their stories is one of the most nourishing things that I've ever done for myself outside of my dissertation research. So yes, I highly agree. And the westernization of knowledge has sort of relegated oral histories on this like lower rank of knowledge, which is a different discussion, but yeah. Indigenous knowledge passed down through dance, songs, and arts. Yep. 53% of the internet. Okay. Right. The internet is not always super reliable. Okay. I'm curious to know where people are, because as I'm sharing this information, I want you to know that it's valid in my respect, and I want you to know where it's coming from. A lot of it came through the archives. I spent a lot of time digging through archives at various libraries and other institutions, digging out this information, and also talking to a lot of elders, recovering oral histories and stories that have been forgotten within our culture. All right. Thanks again for entertaining my curiosity. Okay. Okay, so moving on. African farmers invented a wide selection of agricultural tools prior to the dawn of Western patenting. One example was considered to be the oldest tool in the world, according to some, a digging stick that was first used in Africa millennia ago, before agricultural systems took hold, where plants were intentionally planted in certain places in alignment with the seasons. Foragers would dig up wild tubers to eat, and this simple tool was later adapted for farming purposes, such as making holes for seeds. The mortar and pestles were also ancient African technologies for hulling or milling grains that have also been used for millennia, and began use with the dawn of agricultural systems in Egypt. And many of us are probably most familiar with the handheld mortar and pestle now that we use in our quote unquote modern kitchens for this purpose and other purposes. I think I probably use mine more for breaking down herbs to release the flavors before I putting it in the pot or the pan. And I shared this table last week, and I wanted to bring it back because I just love it. Again, Dr. Obusu Bendeli created this table of agricultural inventions of African American scientists. And this can be found in the Sage Handbook of African Cultural Heritage in North America. And it outlines Black or African American inventors during the 19th and 20th centuries. And actually before Henry Blair, who's listed here in the 1830s as the person who patented the corn and cotton planter, an enslaved farmer known as Sam gave Eli Whitney the idea for the cotton gin, which catalyzed industrialization and expanded the need for more enslaved labor. So the idea of the cotton gin was rooted in African technologies that dated back to the 5th century. So I always want to uplift that small facet or large facet because it's not depicted here on the table. And again, through my oral histories, which I highly value as a producer of knowledge and a retainer of knowledge, George Washington Carver, who I became very familiar with in my studies at Tuskegee, and also through my talking and building relationship with farmers in the Midwest, of course, is a giant in sustainable agriculture. And he's made phenomenal contributions to sustainable and regenerative ag, which is why many people call him the father of sustainable agriculture in the Americas. And Carver's understanding of plant biology, particular to the biological construction of basic leaf patterns, was used as the basis for the industrial assembly line that Henry Ford adopted at the dawn of the auto industry in the early 20th century. And this story was shared with me through by a Black farmer that farms right outside of Detroit, the last rural slither of Southeast Michigan. And he was saying how his great grandfather at this point heard this story directly from one of Carver's advisees when Carver was spending a lot of time in the Midwest and working with Henry Ford. Henry Ford took the idea that Carver shared with him of the leaf, or the main vein here down the middle is used as the main part, or the artery, so to say, like the fuel of the plant, and then the branching off of the leaves, or the branching off of the lines on the leaves, act as ancillary production units, which is where Henry Ford got the idea of the assembly line. And when I was told the story, I was flabbergasted. Of course, we can't find this in any textbooks. We can't find this in any regular books. And so again, these cultural stories passed down through generations are so important. Carver also invented the first soy-based polymer that has been used in many products. As some may know, Carver had a friendship with Henry Ford, as mentioned, and Ford approached him with a problem, and he said that the wooden steering wheels at the time in the Ford vehicles were causing splinters in the hands of drivers. And so Carver chemically engineered the first soy-based polymer in the late 1930s that was first used in the Ford car care products. So that's another example of how George Washington Carver's Black agrarian knowledge contributed substantially to not only agriculture, but the auto industry as a related intersecting sector of our economy. I shared this last week again, but just for those that didn't attend, community land trust is a mechanism by which land is held in trust and managed by nonprofits and used for whatever a community chooses, whether that's housing, small businesses, cultural spaces, gardens, parks, farms, and so on. And the land is usually owned by a trust, which keeps it out of the speculator's hands. But residences and other structures can be privately owned and inherited, allowing community members to build wealth. And a lot of people don't know that the community land trust movement started with a Black farming group, New Communities, Inc. in Georgia in the 1960s, 1969 to be exact. And they owned a collective of almost 6,000 acres in Lee County, Georgia. And they instituted the first community land trust through church donations and just seed money from the Sharecroppers Fund and money they were able to pull together from farmers in the area as a way to build Black agrarian wealth in that area at that time. And this is another repeat from last week, Booker T. Whatley and CSAs. Shout out to Tuskegee and the influence on Booker T. Whatley. One of his 10 commandments, which he outlines in his book, How to Make $100,000 Farming 25 Acres, was the importance of what he called clientele membership clubs. And members of this club paid an initial membership fee, which contributed to the success of the farm. And in return, they received fresh produce that they would pick themselves. And this ensured a constant cash flow into the farm while saving on time and labor. And Dr. Wiley identified this as an essential aspect of a successful farm in the 1960s and 1970s. And today, this idea is commonly referred to as community supported agriculture, or CSA, and it's becoming more popular as the demand for local food grows. And the new North Florida Cooperative and the Farm to School movement is a somewhat another untold story. A group of innovative Black farmers from the New North Florida Cooperative Association, Inc. in 1995 had a goal to provide marketing services to participating farmers, collectively selling produce to markets such as local school districts. And in order to help secure their first customer base, the cooperative donated 3,000 pounds of washed, chopped, and bagged leafy greens to the Gaston County schools as a free sample, which solidified the business relationship and was the beginning, or what we know is the beginning, of the farm to school movement. So again, this started with Black farmers in Florida. This is again a repeat of last week. Cooperatives are a huge, important political philosophy used by Africans in the building of U.S. agriculture since we were forcibly brought here to the Americas from Africa, because realizing that our survival depended on working together and sharing resources, we pulled from the collective traditions from the African nations and civilizations we came from. For example, enslaved Black people might share a small kitchen garden to provide more variety of food than what the master would give. The Underground Railroad was also considered a cooperative, and the way people pulled their various resources together to shelter and guide enslaved peoples to freedom. All of these examples are relevant to how we think about African influences on U.S. ag, because this kind of Black cooperativism is what sustained us through centuries of exploitation based on building land-based wealth for white settlers. And the last example I'll share that is probably more recent, or is obviously the more recent example, a more modern example of Black cooperativism, is the Black Panther Party and how they use radical Black power to pull together community and corporate resources to feed children in their community for breakfast, because literally thousands of children were going to school hungry because we live in a racially capitalist system that puts profits over people, and not everyone has access to 3 meals a day. And so this free breakfast program that was spearheaded by the Black Panthers was then taken over by the federal government. Of course, Black Panthers never received their the credit for stewarding this program into existence. And the USDA program began piloting the free breakfast efforts, ironically, around the same time that the COINTELPRO program began to dismantle the Black Panthers internally. And in 1975, the school breakfast program was permanently authorized, and today it helps to feed over 14 million children before school each day. And this is a book list that I shared last week, I'm sharing it again. These are really wonderful sources of Black agrarian history and culture generally. So I think Kate is providing this in a Google Doc for those who may be interested. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyler, for your presentation. I know people have a lot of questions, but we're going to go right into Dr. Zabawa's presentation. But one thing I was kind of in awe of, if you went back, I was like trying to zoom into my screen on the book list, Land and Power. Dr. Zabawa is actually an author on that book. So I don't even know if Dr. Zabawa caught that himself, but I was like, what? And I was looking, because it's small font, but I was like, that's him. So I just love the synergy you shouted Tuskegee out, and not even for the sake of shouting Tuskegee out, but like so many great giants were given life in your presentation. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know people probably have questions, but we're going to take all questions at the end. So please hold on to them. But also we welcome comments in the chat box. We saw the chat box was really active. So thank you for asking that question, Dr. Tyler, and letting people get a chance to expand on what kind of knowledge they think about as worthy. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Zabawa now. And Dr. Zabawa, we welcome you for your presentation. And we'll go ahead and transition so that way we can get to dialogue. And I know people probably have some burning questions. So thank you so much.
All right. Does everyone see that okay? Is that okay? I knew this was going to be a problem. Never follow people like Shakara or Lindsey. I mean, it is terrible. I mean, these are the leaders. These are the folks that are taking charge. And so I'm really honored to do some presentation following Shakara. A lot of things that she's mentioned that we've been working on at Tuskegee, or in other ways. She mentioned the Community Land Trust New Communities. That was started in part by Shirley Sherrod and her husband. And it was interesting, I was on a Zoom call with USDA last week, and you know, USDA is never shy about getting sued. They always get sued, they always pay, but no one goes to jail. And through the last couple administrations, the only person fired from USDA was a Black woman, and that was Shirley Sherrod, and for no reason at all. Shakara also mentioned Gaston County. Turns out I did my dissertation research in Gaston County, so I know Gaston County very well. And Wusa Bendelli and I are very good friends. And I mean, there's this whole network of people out there that are doing some really great work. I was given I gave a couple ideas about what I would talk about. I said I could talk about the history of cooperative extension from the perspective of Tuskegee, or I could talk about inequities and disparities in the land grant system. And so the first choice seemed to be the one that won, but then I kept going over this material, and actually it's the same thing. That is, when we're looking at the founding of cooperative extension, we have to look at it in terms of inequities, disparities, particularly in terms of support from Washington. So to start, I want to give a little bit of perspective. I mean, we can't start looking at extension without getting some historical perspective again. And I'm just showing this picture right here. And you can sort of make out what's going on. It's kind of wavy. And now it's getting a little fuzzy, but a little bit into focus. We can probably make out what's going on here. And then we have this. And many years ago, probably 20 years ago, I was riding out in the rural counties, and I passed by this old man plowing. And, not the usual thing you see. And so I happened to have my camera with me, and I hopped out my car, and I walked over to the fence. And as he walked by, he looked up, and I said, would he mind if I took his picture? And he said, no problem at all. But he had that look in his face. I don't have any problem with you taking a picture of why don't you do something useful, like get behind this plow? And so it sort of brings in, what was I doing? What was he doing? Why was he doing what he was doing? And it just, different angles about how we can approach particular issues. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about extension. And we all know that extension started in 1914 with the Smith-Lever Act, but it really had a long gestation period. And that's where Tuskegee comes in. And so we have here, this is from the act. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the idea is that Smith-Lever and extension comes through the Department of Agriculture. and that importantly, there's a connection between the Department of Agriculture and colleges of agriculture. It is the land grant colleges. So we have those two things going on. There's USDA at the federal level, and then there are the land grant colleges, both 1862 and 1890 for this presentation, at the state level. And then, besides the colleges, we then look at this idea of what is being taught, that is, or what is being used through extension. And that is this practical application of research, that is, what's going on, and we could say through the experiment stations that were created during the Hatch Act, and then transformed so that they could be useful at the local level. So we have then looking at two different kinds of agencies. One is the USDA as an educational agency, and then also the knowledge dissemination agency. And so for the land grant colleges, you know, we hear mostly about the 1862 or the white land grant schools, which are in all 50 states and then the territories. And then we look at the 1890 institutions, which are in the South. And I added on to two others. We have the 1994 land grants, which are the Native American colleges. And it turns out that Washington has one, the Northwest Indian College. And then the 2008, or what we call the Hispanic Serving Institutions. And Washington has four of those: the Big Bend Community College, the Columbia Basin College, the Wenatchee Valley College, and the Yakima Valley Community College. But in reality, these colleges or universities now, after 1862, have been born out of disparity. It is, the idea was that these colleges should, well, the 1890s were created based on a separate but equal clause. That is, the 1862s could not receive federal funding if they discriminated against students based on color. However, they could discriminate as long as they created another school. And then the funds would be, as the Act says in 1890, the funds from the federal level were equitably distributed. But the same goes for the 1994s and the 2008s. But along this line, we also had other agricultural schools, that is what are called Congressional Agricultural District Schools. That is, the land grant schools were created as a way to bring higher education to, let's say, the common man and woman. That is, higher education was usually for the professions like medicine and law. And you saw most of those kinds of colleges in the Northeast, like Yale and Harvard and so on. So what they found was that they needed a bridge between what were, let's consider, high schools and the agricultural schools. And these were founded in congressional districts of the southern states. Alabama, they started in 1889, Georgia and Virginia, 17 years later, and then later on in Arkansas and Oklahoma. Now, these schools offered curriculum that included liberal arts, sciences, agriculture, home economics, and that they were even considered enhanced comprehensive high schools. And in Alabama, these CDAs had a close tie with the 1862 land grants and a close tie with the commissioners of agriculture. The ties were so close that the state appropriated $3,000 for each school and then $2,500 checks continuously throughout the year. Now, interestingly, there were no CDAs associated with the 1890s or the communities they served. Now, another form of dissemination that we might consider in terms of extension were farmer institutes. So even before land grant colleges, states were engaging the local populations in agriculture through farmer institutes. These meetings grew out of the need for making farms more profitable and also for taking care of natural resources, particularly land. They were particularly useful in the Midwest. Some of the early cases of these institutes were in the form of clubs and societies as early as the late 1700s in Maine and Massachusetts. Now, through time, state departments or commissions of agriculture, as well as agricultural experiment stations created by the Hatch Act, soon took over the role of organizing these farmer institutes. And by 1895, there was a formal organization of Farmer Institute workers. By 1905, 45 states had farmer institutes, and they accounted for 10,000 half-day sessions for almost 1 million attendees. So if you went to one of these institutes, which might be a day or two, they covered such topics as crop production and disease, animal husbandry, dairying, fruit trees, root crops, vegetables, soil chemistry and fertility, machinery, and more. And these institutes also were not focused solely on, let's say, the male farmer, but also on women as well as girl and boy institutes. Again, there are no records of farmer institutes in African American communities. Now, midway through the first decade of the 20th century, a new idea came about called movable schools. Now, movable schools came about because farmer institutes didn't cover enough material over a short period of time. So what they did was you had almost whole departments from the 1862 schools would go into a community for between 1 and 4 weeks, perhaps meeting in a city hall or in a high school. And then they would cover one particular topic in very great detail. Again, there's no recorded instances of these movable schools in Black communities. So what I'm looking at is how is agricultural extension, before it's called extension, disseminating information into local communities. And so, you know, you might have these farmer institutes or these movable schools. Now, the real impetus, some people would say, comes with Stephen A. Knapp, who is often called the father of cooperative extension. Now, for Knapp's contribution, 2 important dates should be highlighted. The first is February 26, 1903. This is when he established the first formal farm demonstration on a 70-acre plot on Walter Porter's farm in Terrell, Texas. It was initially created to look at new production methods where, you know, local farmers could come and compare their methods to what was going on. The demonstration took more importance when it was given part of a $250,000 USDA grant to look at the impact of boll weevil on cotton. And then for Knapp, it was the on-farm demonstration that was crucial. He said, quote, "The farmers' cooperative demonstration work may be regarded as a method of increasing farm crops and as logically the first step toward a true uplift, or it may be considered a system of rural education for boys and adults by which a readjustment of country life can be effected and placed upon a higher plane of profit, comfort, influence, and power." Now, the second important date comes 3 years later on November 12, 1906. On this date, 2 farm demonstration agents are appointed by the USDA. They are William Crider Stallings for Smith County, Texas, and Thomas Monroe Campbell for Macon County and surrounding counties in Alabama. John B. Pierce, who served Gloucester County in Virginia, followed December 14. The key to these importance is that as agents, Stallings, Campbell, and later Pierce were a permanent presence in the local community for demonstration purposes. However, while Stallings' appointment was based on his abilities as a progressive farmer, particularly for corn and swine, both Campbell and Pierce represented a partnership with a land grant institution, that is Tuskegee Institute for Campbell and Hampton Institute for Pierce, and thus were the true precursors of the USDA land grant partnership in the Smith-Lever Act. Now, up to this point, I could say that, this is sort of a logical progression that leads to 1914 in the Smith-Lever Act. But what's going on is a parallel development. That is, you didn't see the farmer institutes, you didn't see the movable schools, you didn't see the other schools in the Black community. But a lot of work was going on. Oh, this is a quick picture of this is the Porter demonstration farm. Porter's the man on the right, but the person who did all the work was John McQuinney. He was the one that was doing the work with the boll weevil demonstration. These are the demonstration agents I mentioned before. There's T.M. Campbell from Tuskegee, Stallings from Texas, and J.B. Pierce from Hampton Institute. So this parallel model is what we call the Washington model or the Tuskegee model. Now, check my hand. When Booker T. Washington came to Tuskegee in 1881, he spent his first months traveling throughout the rural counties to see the living conditions of the people he would be serving. As he recounted later, I confess that what I saw during my first month of travel and investigation left me with a very heavy heart. The work to be done to lift these people up seemed almost beyond accomplishing. Now, Washington's overall impression was that agriculture was the key, since so many depended upon it for a living. He needed, quote, to show the people how to put new energy and new ideas into farming, as well as into intellectual and moral religious life of the people. So now remember, you had the district schools, you had the farmer institutes, the movable schools. Well, for Washington, he decided to bring people to campus. That is, when he first came, he initiated monthly meetings for farmers. These meetings later evolved in 1892, 11 years later, into the annual Tuskegee Negro Conference, which is still going on today. According to Washington, the purpose of this conference was to bring together for a quiet conference, not the politicians, but the representatives of the common, hardworking farmers and mechanics, the bone and sinew of the Negro race, and its ministers and teachers. Two objectives shall be kept in view. First, to find out from the people themselves the facts as to their conditions and to get their ideas as to the remedies for the present evils. Second, to get information as to how the young men and women now being educated can best use their education in helping the masses. Now remember, when we're looking at the farmer institutes and the movable schools, this is the universities going into the communities. What Washington is saying is, I'm going to talk to the communities to say what they need done to help remedy their situations. Now, a major output of the conference was a set of resolutions that were discussed and voted on at the end of the session. Over the years, common themes appeared, including buying land, raising your own food, building better homes, extending the school year, paying attention to the character of your leaders, developing your own moral character, and significantly, holding conferences similar to all of this, similar to this one, in every community wherever possible. Okay, so this is from a photograph of the Tuskegee Negro Conference, one of them. And then we have some of the attendees, the men and women. And then the first conference was started in Porter Hall. That became too small, so they did the pavilion, and then finally they had a chapel built, and you can see inside. And as many as 3,000 to 4,000 people would attend these annual conferences. Now, While Washington recognized the importance of the Negro Conference in terms of outreach, especially for those who could not afford to attend his institute, he also understood that for every attendee of the conference, and there were thousands, that this was only a small proportion compared to those who could not attend. In this regard, it was his habit to close the conference with a call for those to not just take what they learned and keep it to themselves, but to go back and spread the word to their communities at large. And to further impact the Negro Conference, Washington encouraged the creation of local conferences at the county level throughout the year. And representatives of these conferences would then attend the annual conference on the campus. Attendees could then report to other representatives, as well as attendees from other states and the region to receive comments and feedback. Now, in an effort to coordinate the activities of these local farmers' conferences, the position of conference agent was proposed at the 4th annual conference in 1895. The appointment of, and this quoted, an education missionary who should visit every portion of the state in the interest of the masses of the people. This education missionary became the conference agent. Now, the duties of this agent were to directly connect with the farmers, their way of living, and the necessity of keeping their schools and grounds clean. They told just how to care for their homes, schoolhouses, and premises. Of this work, more attention was given to farming than anything else. They talked about schoolwork very little compared with farming. We now have farming under this improved system, which grew right alongside of the Tuskegee Conference. Now, the first conference agent was Thomas Jackson. He was a graduate of Fisk University and later became an instructor of math at Tuskegee. Washington chose Jackson for this new position. And this is from a report of his 3rd year of his appointment. He visited 45 of the 66 counties of Alabama in the interest of meeting at the conference today. He has also visited many other states, and by meetings and literature has given help to those interested in organizing local conferences all over the South. He reports 150 local conferences organized during the year and has a record of over 250 conferences in all. Most of them meet regularly, once a month. These local conferences are very much like the Farmers' Institutes of the North. Among the subjects they discuss are what crops pay best, the value of diversity of crops, how to plant a garden, to raise poultry, pigs, and cattle, how to begin buying a home, how the husband and wife can help each other, how to make the home and yard attractive, how to live at home instead of out of the store, the right kind of minister and teacher, the importance of keeping children busy in and out of school. Out of these conferences, many other instances have grown county fairs in which both black and white have exhibited products and field and articles from the shop and the home. Basically, what he's doing is cooperative extension. And you have to notice too that he visited 45 out of 67 counties of Alabama. The Black Belt only has 18 counties. So he's going to counties that there might be black farmers, but very few in terms of the overall population of that county. Now, after Jackson's service, 4 other people followed him, and they all were exemplary before and after their service. Isaac Fisher became the president of what was later University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, the 1890 school in Arkansas. William Moore became a doctor, a medical doctor. Clinton Calloway became director of the Extension Service at Tuskegee, a position he held for more than 25 years. The Jessup wagon, which I'll talk about in just a minute, was built under his direction. And he was also a major player in the Rosenwald School program. And then finally, not shown here, William Rakestraw was the longest serving conference agent from 1905 till 1919 and became a leader at the Lomax Hannon College of the AME Zion Church. What made Washington's model of local conferences and even monthly farmer institutes, which he started in 1898, different from the traditional farmer institutes, was that one, they were locally organized. Two, in many cases, monthly on schedule. Three, assisted by and coordinated by a Tuskegee-based conference agent. And four, they received no support by the state. By way of comparison, in 1899, the state of Alabama, through the experiment station at what is now Auburn University, supported 21 farmers' institutes while visiting 21 counties. That same year, Thomas Jackson visited 45 counties and worked on their conferences. I'm going to go quickly through this, but we talked about the movable schools, but there's also Tuskegee helped to develop a school on wheels. That is, how to take what was going on campus at the experiment station, at the research farm, and take it to the farmers at their individual conferences. The first one was called the Jessup Wagon because it was funded by a philanthropist, Mr. Jessup, and he provided $674.50 to put equipment demonstrations and plant demonstrations and animal demonstrations that was pulled by a horse through the different communities. It was started under the direction of George Washington Carver, and the first full-time person with the Jessup wagon was Thomas Monroe Campbell. And here we see a picture of the Jessup wagon, a drawing, and then in the community. The Jessup wagon was then followed later by the Knapp agricultural truck, and then followed later by the Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels, which lasted until 1944. So what I've posited is kind of this parallel development of what was going on in terms of extension. That is the Knapp model, which we see going up to 1914, and then the Washington model, which was going alongside, but being more in terms of what was happening in the communities themselves. Now, federal support of the farm demonstration program continued after the 1903 demonstration in Texas in the Bull Weevil. And then by 1905, the General Education Board, a philanthropic organization funded mainly by John D. Rockefeller, was interested in supplementing USDA farm demonstration areas outside of Bull Weevil areas. Through connections between Tuskegee and the General Education Board, Knapp became aware of the work of Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, and asked Washington to recommend a Tuskegee graduate who is, quote, well posted in agriculture, knows how to mix with men, is a good practical farmer, and can make a good talk on agriculture. Knapp came down to Tuskegee in 1906 and proposed that one Black man be used and placed on the farm demonstration staff. In addition, they would use Tuskegee's Jessup wagon to reach each month about 150 demonstration farm plots. Campbell became the first demonstration agent and operator of the Jessup wagon in an agreement signed November 6, 1906. Now, Washington tried to get Knapp to expand the area of Black demonstration agents to include Mound Bayou in Louisiana and into Texas. But Knapp replied, quote, in fact, Mr. Washington, I'm trying to manage this colored work in the Gulf states as an extension of the Tuskegee work. From my knowledge of conditions, I think it will work better to keep it as an attachment and extension of your work than to consider it as something inaugurated by us, meaning the USDA. So, cooperative extension as we know it was created by the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. The question then is one of where did it come from? Many have argued that extension in some form had occurred whenever the need arose. That is, necessity is the mother of invention. Others would argue that it was a logical outgrowth of a series of incremental steps, from clubs to institutes to movable schools. That is an evolutionary approach. However, I would argue that cooperative extension, in the true sense of the word, of a partnership between land-grant institutions or moral act colleges, and the creation of a method of outreach to those as found in Section 2 of Smith-Lever was already in place at Booker T. Washington School at Tuskegee, due to a vision to uplift his people and through educational outreach mechanisms, such as the annual Negro Conference and the Conference Agent, which was then followed by various forms of the School on Wheels. Contemporaneously, there was the farm demonstration work of Seaman Knapp. The major difference is that Knapp had the benefit of the support of USDA, whereas Washington had to go the route of private philanthropic organizations like the General Education Board. In fact, as different agencies and organizations improved their outreach, the US government seemed more inclined to co-opt or take it over than they were, and they seemed more disinclined when targeting largely African American educational institutions, outreach, and communities. Together, however, when Washington and Knapp met in 1906, the movement for a national cooperative extension service would be pushed well on its way. And this is on Tuskegee. It's a site not far from my office that highlights the inauguration of Campbell as an extension agent. And to quote Robert Moton, the second president of Tuskegee, the successor to Booker T. Washington, no other two men have done more for the Negro in the lower South since emancipation than did Seaman Knapp and Booker T. Washington. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zabawa. Thank you for leaving us with that quote. We'll open it back up now for questions and if in conversation for both you and Dr. Tyler. So if anyone has any questions they would like to drop in the chat box, or any just immediate reflections on some of the things that you thought about, we welcome that. And so you can either put it in the chat box and I'll read it out, or you can put it in the, or you can just go ahead and unmic. We welcome you to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable, or if you just want to ask a question. Oh, I see some people turn their cameras on. Hey, nice to see you all. Nice to see you all. Well, I can just kind of, oh, okay. I see some more people coming on. Oh, thank you. We've got a question in the chat box. So I think this is probably going to be for you, Dr. Zabawa. Roby asked, is the Smith-Lever Act still in effect?
Yes, that's the mechanism for funding for cooperative extension through the 1862 schools. Now, we can go deep into this, but the legislation for Smith-Lever talks about funding that goes from Washington through cooperative extension. It also says that if a state has more than one land-grant school, that the funding, and I wrote it down over here, should be equally divided between the two schools. It doesn't say equitably, it says equally divided, unless otherwise directed by the state legislature. So from 1914 to the mid-1960s, all funding in the South went to the 1862 schools. And then some funding went from the 1862s to the 1890s. At no point has funding been equal between the two institutions. But yes, Smith-Lever is still in effect.
Thank you for that, Dr. Zabawa. We have another question coming in from Sam. This question is, what are some things that land-grant universities can do to reconcile with their discriminatory past? That's an awesome question, and I bet it has a very expansive answer. So thank you for posing that question, Sam. And also thank you, Roby, for starting us off with questions. And I think that too could be for both Dr. Tyler and Dr. Zabawa. But Dr. Zabawa, since you just started, do you mind and then passing it over to Dr. Tyler?
Yeah, let her think. Uh-oh. Well, I'll just say, just quickly, one thing that again, this is like an 1862, 1890 kind of thing. But I imagine it's also in the competition when you have 1994s and HSIs. And I'll just be honest, okay? And this is just me. But they need to stop trying to kill us. And by that mean taking our programs and trying to take our funding. That is, many times we have funding streams that are meant to go directly to us, and the next thing we know, we're in competition with larger institutions for the same small pot of money. You know, our existence has been serving small-scale, limited resource, African-American, socially disadvantaged farmers. But then when it's, it becomes, I guess, sexy to jump on this bandwagon, all of a sudden, the big diesel comes into town. And so it's just, let us do our work and give us the funding we need to do it well. That's the best thing that they could do.
Thank you for your honesty, Dr. Zabawa. Dr. Tyler, did you have any thoughts you'd like to throw in on that question of what can land-grant universities do to reconcile with their discriminatory past?
I agree with everything Dr. Zabawa has shared. Yeah, just hand over the money. That would be really nice, a nice starting point. And it can be within the frame of reparations or some other lens. But yeah, definitely starting with a more equitable distribution of funds.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that on. And I see Marcy Ostrom has a question about, have you seen any progress in the allocation of federal extension funds to 1890s? Dr. Zabawa, I'm going to kick this question over to you.
Okay, see, I should have done that. I should have done that program. Okay, when you look at the legislation, okay, for research and extension, for both of those, okay, they have it's a mandate, federal mandate that says that for every dollar the federal government gives the land grant, the state has the match. There's a state matching fund requirement. Mm-hmm. Now, there is no problem, every 1862 has always received their state match. That is not true of the 1890s. Now, the federal law also says that the states can ask for a waiver. That is, if they can't make the match, that they can say to the federal government, we can't make the match. And it could be for economic reasons, it could be for disaster, weather, whatever reason they can come up with. But the match cannot go below 50%. Now, right now, the average match is 80% for the 1890s. Okay. Now, some 1890s receive their full 100%. Others receive close to 50%. That is, they are missing half of their match. And even the 50% requirement can be waived. So there have been times when some 1890 schools have received less than 50% match from the states. Now, this leads to, well, so what? Now, if the federal government does not agree, that is, they do not grant the waiver, And it's possible that those 1890 schools would then have to return that money so that it then would match what the state had given them. So again, it's a way of control and a way of putting these institutions at risk. So no, there's been a little bit of progress, but 80% is not 100%, which is what they're due.
Thank you. I remember from school, and 80% is a B- at best. And I don't know if that exactly translates, but you can't get it, won't get those all A's. It's not the same sort of excellence. Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Zabawa. And I wanted to see if anyone else had any other questions that they wanted to go ahead and ask or put in the chat box. But I also had a question myself, just thinking about the connections and the impact that you see that Tuskegee's had, but also Dr. Tyler, you spoke about food, and you talked about specifically rice, and how people at first, the narrative was attributing rice to I guess like European influence in the Americas, and then like it sounded almost as like one or a few set of scholars were able to like completely shift that narrative. And could you talk a little bit more about the, I guess, the value of looking into these like kind of pre-Columbian, these like kind of foodways, if you would put it like that, and why should people care about that now? If you would speak about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lindsey. That's a really poignant question. Let's see if we have about 8 minutes. I'm gonna really try to be brief. So there, I think our whole mindset, our whole worldview has been, we've been brainwashed by this very colonial mindset, me included. Like I'm still unlearning things that I've learned over the years. And I really see it as a liberating process. You know, like we can't attribute all of the inventions and all of the successes and what have you, specifically an agricultural framework beyond that, to European domination. Like, because that's outside of it being false, it also oppresses us philosophically and economically, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we really work to reclaim these foodways, as you say, their histories, their principles and their processes, prior to a lot of the information that's available, that happens to start with European colonization of the Americas, we get a broader understanding of the world and the reality that we live in. And a lot of these foodways hold a lot of solutions to the current crises that we're experiencing, such as the climate crisis and so on. And so when we understand that not everything comes from a European history, or not everything is grounded in this European dimensions, we get further away from this colonial or this mental oppression that all of us are suffering from. And if we're going to survive on this planet as humanity, I think it's really important that all of us really dig deep and find ways to disown or disarm the monopolization that Western knowledge has over us in many ways. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really impactful answer, just kind of listening to that perspective. And we have just a few more minutes left before we wrap up. If anyone had any final burning question that they wanted to get asked, or just any words of thanks or acknowledgement that they wanted to leave Dr. Zabawa or Dr. Tyler with, we welcome that. Oh, we could do the hand waves. Thank you, Kathy. So if you heard something you enjoyed, go ahead and wave. You could do the hand waves. If you learn something new, you could go ahead and do the hand waves. And if you plan on coming back next week, you could do the hand waves. Hand waves? Yes. So, yeah. So, any.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank Dr. Tyler for one thing. And when she started out with the Sankofa, because I've worked in Ghana, it's obviously a very important symbol. But symbols are really strong. And one of the ones that she brought up, and it wasn't as a symbol per se, it was an instrument, and that was the mortar and pestle. And I think it's a very, very powerful symbol because it symbolizes community. That is, you can't pound rice by yourself. You can't pound fufu by yourself. And it also, it goes into other things too. Like all the major agricultural activities until recently required community. I talked to my classes about, the air conditioner destroyed community in a lot of places because everyone went inside and closed their windows and doors. Where before you sat on the stoop and you had community. The same thing too with a lot of modern agriculture. Native culture, you can't fish by yourself. You can't manage the nets by yourself. You can't do a lot of things by yourself. So I think, I would recognize that we need to think of the mortar and pestle as a food system symbol of that kind of community. And it doesn't have to necessarily be agriculture, but other things too. So I want to thank her for bringing that out.
Thank you, Dr. Zabawa. That's really, really amazing for you to elaborate on that. And I wholeheartedly agree. Thanks for sharing. And thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot about the cooperative extension system and got some reminders when I've done some reading on it way, way, way back.
I guess too, I have my mother's mortar and pestle that she, from Puerto Rico, would use for spices and garlic. I mean, the thing is soaked all the way through wood. And it just means that, it's community, it's heart, it's family, it's all those kinds of things. And your presentation was, the things that we don't realize what we're borrowing from, who we are the successors. You need to know where it comes from. Thank you, Lindsey.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say thank you, Dr. Zabawa, and thank you, Dr. Tyler, so much for your presentations. We are at the end of our time. So we just really, there's some comments in the chat box. We welcome you to look over those. People telling you thank you for your thoughts and times. I just dropped in the chat box the link to the resource list. It's going to be updated each week as new resources come. So make sure you all check that out. And we look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place. And again, thank you so much. Waves all around to our presenters. You guys were awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kick it back over to Kate to close us out. And thank you again.
Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our wonderful facilitator. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you all for being here, and we will see you again next week. Have a great afternoon or evening.
Thank you.
Bye.